Hey, what's up everybody? Today we have a special guest tutorial by my friend Jonathan Winbush. So I've been hearing a lot of rumblings lately about Unreal Engine and real-time rendering in general, and I've been wanting to learn more. So I thought it'd be cool to bring Winbush on to give us a quick overview of the workflow between Cinema 4D, bringing it into Unreal and then rendering it out. So in this tutorial, you're gonna learn that workflow, you're gonna learn a lot of the basics of Unreal, how to set everything up, and I think it's a great primer to wrap your head around a technology that is quickly becoming a huge part of our industry. So make sure to follow Winbush on YouTube. He has a ton of great motion design tutorials. I'll put a link below. All right, here's Winbush in a primer on Unreal Engine.
What up, what up? Winbush here, and today I'm excited to show you guys how you can make this. Now I'm doing this in collaboration with Pixel Labs. I'm going to take the Modern City kit. We're going to build out our scene in Cinema 4D. Then we're going to bring it into Unreal, get everything all lit up, and then we're going to render it out in real time. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, so for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the Modern Cityscape Collection here from Pixel Labs. And first, I'm going to do this in like a two-parter. So in this first part, I kind of just want to show you how you could take one of these models and bring it into Unreal. And then the second part, I'm actually going to build out a cityscape using a Murograph cloner. We're going to bring that into Unreal and actually show you how to do a camera animation and render it out in Unreal. And so if you go to pixellabs.net and go to Modern Cityscape Collection, this is what I'm going to be working with. And so to get started, I'm going to take one of these buildings and bring it into Unreal. So I have my content browser over here on the right hand side, and the important thing is we want to use a Cinema 4D native material because in Unreal it doesn't recognize Octane or Redshift. It only recognizes straight Cinema 4D material, so that's really important. So I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to pick one of these buildings here. I like this one, number 4. Let me double click on this, and then on my keyboard I'm going to click on the viewport and click H. And now we have a full view of our building here. And you can see in our hierarchy, we have our building here. We have everything in here that we need, the windows, the glass, the structure, everything. And so what I want to do from here is I'm using R21. So if I go over to File, come down to Project for Cineware. But if you're using like R20 and I believe R19, it's going to be called Save Project for Melange. But in R21, they switched it to Save Project for Cineware, and you have to save it out this way for Unreal to recognize it. So I'm going to save Project for Cineware. I'm just going to name this one Building 04 underscore UE4. And anything that I'm usually exporting out for Unreal, I always do the underscore UE4 for Unreal Engine 4, just so I don't get my files mixed up, because even though it's saved for Cineware, it's going to be a .c4d file. And so let me click Save here. And then I'm going to open up Unreal. And when you open up Unreal for the first time, usually it will open up under this Blueprint tab. And what this does, it has a bunch of presets. So if you want to start off like as a first-person shooter or like a flying game, you can even start off with like an AR template. These are just a bunch of templates to give you a good starting off point. They even have virtual reality in here, which is really cool. But for this example, I'm going to go to this tab. This is Unreal Studio, because I kind of just want to start with a blank. So I'm going to go down here, make sure I have my right folder structure. And by default, it's going to be called My Project. So that's fine for now for this example. So I'm going to just click Create Project and give this a second to open up. And currently I'm using Unreal version 4.23. Right now they do have a beta for 4.24. As in Unreal, usually they come out with betas and they release them like every so often, like bi-weekly. And so if you do want to try 4.24, make sure you go to the website, check out what's in there. But if you want a stable version, as of right now, you want to use 4.23. And so this is what opens up when you have your blank slate. I'm going to delete this floor here. And you can see we kind of have like a video game controller in here. I could delete that, but like if you ever wanted to use it like as if you're building out a game level, or if you just want to walk around your scene, that's automatically set up. So if you have like an Xbox controller, or if you want to use keyboard and mouse, you're all ready to go, no coding or anything. And so for now, let's bring in the building. So right here where it says Datasmith, you want to click on the arrow here, come down to Cinema 4D, click that, and then let's find our folder that we saved our UE4 project. So remember, building 04, UE4. I'm gonna click open. Then I'm gonna just click OK. Now you can make a folder if you want to separate it in different folders, but I'm just gonna click OK because it should make a folder structure for us. And then I usually leave everything check marked on here, but these are just your import options. So you're telling it that you want to import your geometry, your materials, your lights, your cameras, and your animation. I usually just leave everything check marked here. So I'm gonna click import. And this usually takes pretty quick. Yeah. So now we have our building in Unreal. So yeah, it's pretty quick and easy. And as you can see, it actually does have all the Cinema 4D materials. If I open up my content browser down here, double click on materials, you can see I brought everything over. These are the Cinema 4D materials. If I click on geometry, you can actually see it has each piece of broken out geometry that you used in the model down in here. So if you ever want to make any changes or if you want to add collision, you have full range of what you could do down here. And that's basically just the setup. If you just want to start bringing in your geometry in Unreal, that's how you're going to do it. And so in part 2, I'm actually going to show you a scene that I built out in Cinema 4D. I built it out with the MoGraph cloner because Unreal can actually recognize the MoGraph cloner. And so I'm going to show you how to set that up and bring that into Unreal to animate and render out. Okay, so I'm back in the Cinema 4D now. I have a scene that I pre-built out. I have 2 buildings in the front. I have a bridge here. And then I have this MoGraph cloner back here that we have some cityscape buildings here in the background. So I have a camera in here as well that I'm going to use to fly over the bridge into the building. And one of the important things is I have my MoGraph cloner here, and as you can see under instance mode, I have it under instance, and that's because that's the only thing that Unreal will recognize. It doesn't recognize render instance or multi-instance. It won't bring it in. So you want to make sure when you're exporting, you want to have it under instance. And the same thing, I'm using an instance here for the bridge. Like I have the bridge from the kit bash here, and then I just instanced it for the right side. And for instance mode, you want to make sure that it's instanced there as well. And so right now, Unreal can only recognize that. It doesn't recognize any of the other modes. And as you can see here, under my cloner, I just have it cloned out for 6 buildings. And I did that for a reason, because like I could have made maybe like 50 buildings in there. But the thing is, the larger the project size, the more time it takes to recognize in Unreal. So whenever you import it, it has to calculate all that data. So what I usually do is I kind of build my scenes out in chunks out of Cinema 4D, bring them into like a smaller file size, and then just build them out into Unreal. And so I'll show you how to do everything here. But I have a random in here as well. It recognizes that. And so now what I want to do is I'm going to export this out again. Project for Cineware. And then I already saved this earlier, but I'll save it again. And so down in the lower left hand corner, you can see that we have our loading stripe bar. That means that it's saving. And once that's off, then the project is saved, and we can check out the file size, and then we can bring it into Unreal. Okay, it looks like our scene is saved now. Let me go over and see where I saved it at. Just check on the file size. So yeah, it's around 168 megabytes, which isn't too bad. I've brought in file sizes that are like a gig and over. So this should process pretty fast. So our next step is to come into Unreal. And then I'm going to create a project again, just under blank. Okay, cool. So I have my blank slate here that I'm going to work with. So I'm going to delete my floor. I'm going to delete this, the player start. And as you can see on the right hand side, we have this thing called the world outliner. This is basically just your hierarchy window, where this is where everything shows up here. So if you're used to working in Cinema 4D, it's basically this right here where all your objects are, but it's just called the world outliner. So I'm going to delete the player start, and I'm going to delete the reflection capture. Basically, the reflection capture is, you could kind of, like if you have reflective materials, you could go in and really fine tune how everything interacts with each other. But for this example, we don't really need that. And so my next step is come over where it says Datasmith, click on the arrow, come down to Cinema 4D. Then I'm going to find where I saved out my scene. There we go, Pixel Labs underscore scene underscore UE4. That way I don't get my scenes mixed up. I'm going to click open, I'm going to click OK. And then again, I'm just going to leave everything check marked here and click import. Then I'm going to give this a few moments to get everything processed, and then I'm going to show you how you guys can actually build out your lighting, and then we're going to show you how to bring the camera information in, and then we're going to export it from here, show you guys a little bit of real-time rendering. While the stuff in the background is being calculated by Unreal and importing, you guys might be interested in seeing how I got the outline on the building here. And I actually use a luminance material as well. So if I click on my material editor, it's just straight luminance, and we can actually control this in Unreal. But as a bonus, let me show you guys how I outline the building. So I'm going to start a new project. Then I'm going to come over, let's do building 1. And then I'm going to click H on my keyboard to pull out. And then right here, this one that's building 01. I'm going to pull this out of the group here. And then I'm going to hold down the Alt key, double click to hide everything that's in here. So now I just see my building 1. I'm going to actually delete all my materials here so that we just have our building. And so the way that I was able to separate the edges here, let me click on edges right here, then go up to select. Actually, I have to have my building selected. So now I come down to select and hit select all. Now if I right click, come down to the bottom here where it says edge to spline, it's actually going to make a spline based off of all those edges that are selected. So now I can click off my building, come back up to model, click on my arrow again, and I'm going to bring my spline out. And then right here where the pen tool is, I'm going to click on the circle. I'm actually going to bring this down. My radius, I'll bring it down to like 10. And then let me hide my building as well so you can see the spline here. So the spline is just outlining the building. And from here, what I could do is make a sweep node. So come down to sweep, drag my circle in, and then drag my spline in. And now you can see that we actually have geometry that will outline our building. I can make this a little bit larger if I want, because you don't want it paper thin when you bring it into Unreal, or else it will give like this stuttery look. And then let me come back, bring my building back in, and then just add, I made a new material, just double click down here, turn off color, turn off reflectance, turn on your luminance, just make it like a orangey color, something like that. And there we go. So that's how I outlined my building. And then for the material for the building, I just used like a gray material, nothing too crazy. Come down to my color, something like that. Then that's how I built out the building like that. So once we bring it into Unreal, we can actually have full control over the edges here since we are using our luminance material. So I just wanted to show you guys that quick breakdown real quick. Now let's check in with Unreal and see how everything's going. Okay, so we're back in Unreal now. We have our scene in here. As you can see over in our outliner window, everything is brought over here. So we have, it's going to be inside this group called Pixel Lab Scene, because that's what we named our project. And under here, we have our bridge elements. We have our bridge elements from the instance. We have our buildings. We have our camera. And as you notice, when you click on the camera, you kind of get like a picture-in-picture type view here. We have our cloner. And then, actually, let me delete this other stuff too. So we have the sky sphere, the skylight, and reflection capture. I want to delete those because we're going to build this out by scratch. And then for our light source and our atmospheric fog, I'm going to delete that as well. So right now we just have the stuff we have in from Cinema 4D. And from my camera, I'm going to click and drag that out so that it's easier to find. So now we have our scene here, we have our camera, and we have our scene. So let me go through some of the stuff in the content browser. Just like before, we have this animation folder, which now we have this clipboard in here, which has all of our animations in there, which we animated our camera. We have all of our geometry in here as well. We have our materials in here. And we have some extra textures in here from like the roughness of metal and stuff. And so, yeah, let's get started by creating our lighting scene for our scene here. So I want to come over here to my modes on the left hand side. Let me type in sky, and I'm going to make a sky sphere and bring that in here. And then I'm going to drag this up here on the right hand side where we have our details panel. And let's go to our transformation. And I like to zero everything out. So my location, I'm just going to have at 0. And then down here, if I scroll this up a little bit, I like to use these settings down here to kind of define how our sky is going to look. And so right here where it says determine colors by sun position, if we had like a directional light in there, we would actually be able to adjust our sky based on like where the directional light is, kind of like it was a sun. And so what I like to do is I like to uncheck mark this so that I have complete control over the color of our skies here. And so down here under underride, I'm going to stick with like the orange vibe. So my zenith color, I'm going to make it like an orangey color. Same thing for my horizon color. Let's make this like a darker orange. And then my clouds, you can see we actually have clouds up here as well, which over here we can control the cloud speed, which I have it at 1 right now. But if you bring it up to like 10, you can rarely see the clouds starting to move, but we just want like a slow drift. So I'm just going to click 1, and I can actually bring down the cloud opacity a little bit, maybe down to like 0.5. And then for my cloud color, let's lean towards the yellows a little bit more, maybe a little bit darker, somewhere around there. Just make it like an abstract scene. Then overall color, I'm going to come down to my oranges, bring this down a little bit, somewhere around there maybe. All right, cool. And then you see we right here we have horizon fall off. You can actually control your fall off if you look in the background. If you have it all the way up, you have just like a straight line. But if you move it over to the left, the shorter the number, the better the fall off we're going to get. So somewhere around there, something like that. Okay, so now you can see actually some of the reflections off the building and stuff like that. It's reflecting our sky. It's looking pretty cool. And I know you can notice that we're getting some jittery issues in here, and that's because of a couple of things. Let's start off by going to settings. We can work on our anti-aliasing. So if I come under project settings, and then I want to come over to engine, and down here we have a render button. So let me make this smaller and drag this over so we can see what's happening. So when I click on render down here, I want to scroll down until we find our anti-aliasing. So right here we have anti-aliasing methods. Right now it's on temporal AA, which talking to a few game developers, they like using that because it gives you kind of like a dreamy type sequence or look to your viewport here. If you go to FXAA, you can see we're getting rid of the jitters. It's a little bit sharper here now. And then our last one we have MSAA, which really makes it sharp. So I think I'm going to stick with FXAA. It makes it sharp, but it's not super sharp. So I think that looks good for our scene here. So let me click this off now. So let's work on our lighting a little bit more. So I'm going to go back over to my modes. I'm going to come under lights, and I'm actually going to bring a directional light in here. And what's cool about the directional light is up here we have our transform tools. So if I click on rotate, it brings up like this sundial type imagery here. So if I click on it and scroll it around, you can see how the lights are affecting our building here. So if you're used to using like the sun in Cinema 4D, it works exactly the same. So if we want just a little bit of highlights on our buildings here, just to add a little bit of detail in here, maybe something like that maybe. And then if I pull this up, I can actually bring my intensity down a tad bit. So it's default 10. Maybe we bring our intensity down to like 2, something like that. Okay. And then we can also add in some fog as well. So if I go over here, type in fog, there's 2 types of fogs here. The one I like to use is called exponential fog. So if I bring this in, you can really see that we're getting like that cyberpunk fog in here. It looks really cool. If I come over to my scatter color, of course, come down to a little bit oranges, somewhere around there. And if I drag my fog down, you see it's affecting our scene. So if I drag it down, we're getting just a good bit amount of fog in here. And one thing up here too, talking about the lighting. So if I click on my directional lighting, you see right here, we have 3 different instances of lighting. So we have static, stationary, and movable. And so static is like if we want to light our scene and then bake it in, just like how we would bake everything in Cinema 4D. So nothing's moving. Like when we're doing cinematics and we know exactly what our animations are, static is a good thing to use because everything is baked in and it allows it to calculate a little bit faster. If we go over to movable, that's good if you're doing like interactive type of experiences. So if you make like a game or a VR experience, something like that, it's going to base your lighting based off of your character and how he's moving and interacting with the environment. So if different things are moving, the lighting is actually going to run on the fly and it's going to adjust accordingly. And then stationary, to my understanding, it's a little bit of both. So like how we have our buildings here, they're stationary. Basically, it will bake the lighting for stuff that's not moving, but for stuff that is moving, it would also add that dynamic lighting in there as well. And so I want to go, and I'm going to stick with static just so we're going to get a little bit more better lighting. So since we do have everything already pre-adjusted in our animation, and over here you see that it says lighting needs to be rebuilt. Usually when you're working with the scene and you change some lighting around, it's going to have to build your lighting just to kind of bake it in there. So if you come up to builds, you come over to this right arrow, you see we have a few options here. So if we start off, if we go to lighting quality, right now it's under preview, and that's why we're still getting a little bit of jitter in our scene because it's just using the preview. But just like anything else, you have medium, high, and production, in which I'm going to click on production. This is going to give us the highest quality of lighting possible in our scene. It's going to take a little bit to calculate, but whenever we want to render, this is what we want to use. So I'm going to click on that, and then you have to bake it. So you have to go over to where it says build lighting. We want to click on that, and it's going to build our lighting scene here. Just give it a few moments, and then in the lower right hand corner, it's actually going to say building lighting, which once it's doing that, we'll be able to move around in our scene and do other stuff while it's still building out the lighting. So right now it's saying build lighting, and so while it's doing that, I think our scene looks pretty good here. So let's move on to the animation part of it. So if I come over to my animation folder, double click on that, and then I want to double click on the sequencer, in which I already had my sequencer already here in the window, but if you need help finding it, it's not going to be there by default. And so you want to come up to window and then come down to sequencer, and then I just dragged it over here. And basically what a sequencer is, it's like our animation panel in Cinema 4D. And so this is where all your keyframes will show up at, in which if I type in camera, because that's the only thing I have animated, you can see we have our transform tools here. We have our in and out, and you can see with our picture in picture what the animation looks like. And so if we actually want to see what that looks like in our regular viewport here, if I come up to perspective, let's go to cinematic viewport, and then I want to click on perspective again and click on camera. So now this is what our camera sees, and if I click play here, this is what our animation looks like. Okay, so we have that all built out. So the next thing I want to do is make sure that my settings are at the highest level possible before we render this out. So if I come over to engine scalability, when you first start out, it's going to usually be on epic, in which that's going to have pretty good results. But since we're doing a cinematic render, we want to put it on cinematic, so it's giving us the highest quality possible. So we have cinematic clicked on here. It says our lighting build is completed. Let me click apply now. There we go. So everything should be good in here. Whenever we render it out, it's not going to have all this jittering. This is just for the preview window. So now our next step is let's get this thing rendered out. So over here on the left hand side under track, let me click on this, and you want to come down to where it says camera cut track. So click on that, and you have another item here that pops in, and you see on that item it says camera. So we want to add our camera in here. Make sure we're on the frame that we want to start at, which I'm on 0. Click on camera, and then find our camera that's in our scene. You click on that, and you see we actually have a sequence in here now. And the cool thing about the sequencer is it kind of works like a nonlinear editor. And so if you have several cameras in your animation here, we can actually use this to cut between the different cameras there, which is cool since we are doing real-time rendering. We could just on the fly say, like, if we wanted to have a camera flying through like this, and then we wanted to have a camera maybe scaling the building, we can add that all in here and actually edit everything within Unreal. And so before I render out, I kind of want to add some more buildings back there to add a little bit more depth. So let me go back to, let me look at my top view here. Okay, and I'm going to scroll this down, go back to my world outliner. And let's find our cloner. Cool, so we have our cloner here. And right now, this is the only way I know how to do it. So if I want to copy my cloner and then paste another cloner on here, you have to actually have everything opened up here. You have to click up top, drag all the way down to the bottom. I'm holding down the shift key, and then I have all this selected, everything my cloner selected. So I'm gonna hit Control C, and then I'm gonna hit Control V, and now we have our second cloner in here, in which I'm gonna drag this back a little bit and move this over. Then I'm gonna hit Control V again, add some more buildings in here. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit of depth in here. Hit Control V again. And like I was saying before, inside of Cinema 4D, we could just copy and paste like these clones in here. Because if I would have did this inside of Cinema 4D, it would have took a long time for this stuff to calculate once I brought it into Unreal. So this is just a good practice to have. Maybe build your scene out in pieces and bring them in individually. If you're going to do a scene that's kind of like this. So let me go back to my perspective. Now we have a lot more going on in our city scene here. I have to click back on my camera. And there we go. Everything looks good. So the next step is I'm just going to show you guys how to render out now. So I'm going to hit Control S, make sure everything's saved. And over here on the clipboard, you see it says render this movie to a video or an image sequence. So I'm going to click on this. Now we have our render movie settings here. And so here we can actually do render passes just like we're in Cinema 4D. So if you click on render passes and you come down here to include render passes, you have this whole plethora of different options that you could use. You could render out separate paths for ambient occlusion. If we didn't have our sky in here, we could have a map for opacity. We could even render out like the scene depth. So if like you're working in After Effects and Nuke and you wanted to add camera depth later on in post, you have that option to render that out here as well. But for this example, let's just do an AVI. And then my scene is 60 frames per second. I'm just going to do 1080, 1980, or 1920 by 1080. My compression quality, I'm going to bring that up to 100. Then I'm going to pick where I want my scene to render out at. Usually I like doing an EXR for my renders, but for this, I want to show you guys what it looks like when it's rendered out. So I'm going to do an AVI. under file format, you can name it if you want to, or you can look here with the bracketing, what these different things do. So if you did bracket like FPS, it would tell you what frame rate was captured at. Like you could just keep adding these brackets in there, but I'm just going to leave it at default for this. And then under animation, custom start frame, I'm cool where it's at. So now I'm going to click capture movie. I'm going to hit save selected. And then we should see a viewport open up in the top left hand corner. It wants me to save my project, so I'm going to just name this Pixel Labs. Click save. And now we have our viewport in the top left. So as it's rendering in real time, it's just showing you the animation. And down here in the lower right hand corner, it says capture in video. And we can actually click on the folder. And this will bring up, I did a capture earlier, but this is where it's going to be rendering everything too. So give that a few moments to render out. There we go. So it's pretty cool how you can see your whole animation playing out here. So this is, I think this is going to be like the future of rendering, especially if you're working in motion graphics. Like I do a lot of environmental stuff. So this is really cool. I can build out my scene, animate in Cinema 4D, easily bring it into Unreal, and then render everything out in real time. That way, if the client has any changes or anything, I could just go in, make the changes, and output immediately instead of using like massive render farms like I've done in the past. So once I had my render out of Unreal, I brought it into After Effects, just added a little level adjustment, added a little bit of glow to it. And basically this is the final result of our render from Unreal. So this shows you exactly what you could do with the power of Cinema 4D in Unreal, and then bring it into post and just juicy it all up. I mean, it was quick and fast, and if I have any adjustments to make, I can easily make those adjustments, render it out, and only took a couple of moments, and we're all set to go. Yeah, so hopefully this helped you guys out. You know, I think this is the future, being able to take your stuff from Cinema 4D into Unreal, render it out in real time, and that way if we have client notes, we can easily make those adjustments, render them out quick and fast, no need for render farms anymore, and we're all good to go. So if this did help you out, make sure you leave the guys at Pixel Labs a thumbs up, subscribe to their channel, and leave them a comment down below telling them what more stuff you might want to see with Unreal. And make sure you follow me on YouTube as well, right down on this lower third below. And as always, I see you in the next video. Take care, keep creating.